Thank you so much for joining me this morning, Tove. You've had a pretty incredible career across companies like Ørsted, Siemens Dong Energy. You've worked with owners, suppliers, consultancies. So you're in a pretty excellent position to be able to give us a wide-ranging view on energy transition across Europe. Sometimes we get too focused down on what's going on in one particular area. So to have more of a macro view is excellent. We're obviously going to go through a few topics now. I thought I'd kick things off with just a general, what are the new technologies that you are seeing entering the market?
Now, and when you say new technologies entering the market, I think when we talk about energy transition, I think it's probably quite a number of known technologies, but in new applications or new ways. And I think if we look at it from a broader perspective, it's very much about energy storage, where you're looking at hydrogen, you're looking at thermal energy storage, molten salt applications, etc. Then, of course, the hydrogen can be used, and also e-methanol for green fuels, so different ways of green fuels. And then as the last point I'd want to mention today is the CO2 removals in terms of biochars and CCS, etc. And some of these are not necessarily new technologies, but maybe applied in new ways or new solutions.
What would you say are the big challenges that you're seeing for those new technologies, though? And given your previous experience as well, can you compare this to, for example, wind, which has obviously been around for a lot longer and is now quite a mature market? How were they facing challenges in the beginning? How are these companies going to be able to learn from that?
Yeah. Well, I think you can say whenever you want to introduce a new technology or a new way of applying a technology, you need to make a roadmap, and you need to, have the proof of concept. You need to be able to have pilots and then do the scaling up, and that requires both some time and some patience and capital to do it. Plus, it also requires access to sites where you can actually demonstrate things. So having sufficient demonstration sites to test new technologies, and then using the concepts of learning fast and failing fast. Because whenever you do something new, you can't expect that everything works perfectly from day one. So that is a general part. And then you have to remember that when wind, for instance, and especially like offshore wind, was put into the market, it needed subsidies in the beginning, and it needed a scheme where you actually had governments pushing for certain sites to be developed, even though maybe it wasn't the best business cases in the beginning, but in order to get sufficient scale, because economy of scales makes these technologies actually effective in the long term.
Okay. It's that getting that initial opportunity that's so key. Adaptability, obviously, once they've got that, but absolutely getting the chance to have a pilot and having the grant funding in place is sounds like is the first crucial step that we need.
It is, and then I think another thing that these technologies can learn from the wind industry, as an example, is also having both test sites and test facilities, because you need to de-risk the different parts of your product or your solution.
Absolutely. I think that leads us pretty perfectly on to the second point of across Europe, not just in the UK, there's been a number of general elections, government changes going on, and the rest of the world. How do governments affect new and existing green technologies, not just in terms of, again, new elections going on, what's becoming popular, but in laws and regulations, but sort of, would you include uncertainty in terms of like the elements of their actions? How important is it that a government shows consistency with pushing a project through and confidence for the market?
I think consistency is key when you talk in this area, because otherwise you experience what we've seen in other industries, a stop and go uh, case where you need to have the transparency and the consistency, because then you can also get the capital market to invest in the
Yeah.
supply chain. And it's a little bit the hen and the egg discussion, what comes first. It's
Yeah.
like you can't build out hydrogen if you don't have the pipelines, or if you don't know how to transport it from one place to another. So you need to have industry and governments to work jointly together to make this happen. A good example is actually if you take EV in Norway, even though Norway is a fairly cold country, so you wouldn't expect that to be kind of the best place to have EV vehicles. But they put up targets, and they actually facilitated it, and they also incentivized people with better roads and fast track lanes for users. So you need sometimes to push it, and then suddenly it just gets market mechanisms to take over.
Yeah, sort of in direct contrast to what happened with the UK pushing back the home battery installation date and the direct knock on that had to our development.
No, exactly. And of course, especially if you make reverse, previous agreed uh, terms, it creates a lot of uncertainty. And at the end of the day, it's about managing your risks and knowing what is unknown. And if it's too big a question mark, what is the new government going to do, or how can you do it? So therefore, I think similar to like security of supply, you need to have a strong commitment from more than one party behind it in order to make it viable. Governments need to, provide the right framework and incentivize industry to step up, and sometimes create some of the critical infrastructure if it should be owned by governments, depending on what country you're in. But then you also need to look at partnerships, and I think if we take something like green fuels, you need to look at it end to end, because you need to say, in order to create green fuels, you need to have the renewable power plants out there, right? Whether it's wind, solar, whatever. Then you might want to convert it into a new green fuel, whether it's e-methanol, hydrogen, etc. And then or ammonia. So that's kind of the upstream part of the value chain. Then you have the people who produce it into the fuel, and then you need to have the downstream, so the off-takers, and that could be like the shipping companies who need to use the fuel. So you can't look at it isolated. And a good example of where partnerships, when it comes to green fuel, is this first mover coalition that was actually initiated by John Kerry originally as one of his first actions. And I think that's a very strong example where you do see various big companies stepping ahead, even though not all the frameworks are in place, but they see it as part of their own transitioning towards net zero.
Okay, so they've got the motivation there to do that anyway, but also there's so many. It sounds like compatible companies that can create synergies. And again, coming back to the point you made earlier about it's really important that they get to that stage where there is economies of scale and it is a working business model.
It is, and it's and if you take, why do you want to have green fuels? We all know the decarbonization story and why it's important, and economy of scale. But at the end of the day, you also see some of the product factories like Nike and etc. saying, if we want to have a sustainable product. We can't really, sell it on traditional fuel from China to the US, right? So you need to build a broader storyline and look at all the different elements of the story. And I think that you can only do if you talk more about partnerships and more how you can build a bigger cake, and then it's better for everyone, instead of, in order to get economy of scale, you need not one company to be successful, but you need a whole range of companies to be successful. And in order to deliver on the energy transition, it's also a matter of numerous technologies. It's not one technology can't do it by itself.
Yeah, of course. That the holistic offer and the suite of technologies that all fit and complement each other. That's where we need to get to.
Exactly.
Okay, definitely. Well, I mean, obviously, coming back to more of the government angle, because it is still such a huge determinant of how the market is going to affect, how the market is going to play out. And how could we lead from the front in terms of rules and regulations across Europe? What's going to be sort of one of the key things that a government can do from that side within their power to change it?
Well, I think we've taken some good steps when it comes to the Green Deal and getting alignment, because CO2 doesn't know country barriers, right? So you need to look at it again more holistically. Then, of course, in general, I think a lot of the industry and industry associations would prefer not to have it subsidized. But in reality, we're also facing a world where we need to make sure that we can compete on same terms. So if you have big subsidies in China from governments, if you have the IRA in the US. So it's a little bit, is it the carrot or the stick? And I think there we need in Europe to step up a little bit and saying we have been on the forefront in many years. We have shown it in numerous technologies. But also because we actually dare to take the right decisions. And whether it's subsidies or whether it's actually carbon taxation, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, just treating differently. Sometimes taxations might actually work more beneficial, because then the people who are not necessarily going to change also see the benefit in changing.
Absolutely. We need to be doing the two in tandem. Here's the benefit of it, but also, it's sort of the kick that some people might need to make the change as well.
And then, of course, it's also about local content. It's about where do you have production, and there I think both first during the pandemic and later during war times, security of supply has become very evident. And now energy supply is also security politics. So you need to look at it with a broader lens and saying, should we be self-sufficient, and how can we do that? And maybe from a technology point of view, we would like actually to remove all boundaries, but from a commercial point of view and security point of view, we need to make sure we make the right choices.
Absolutely. It kind of comes back to the energy trilemma. Each country wants to be independent and have their energy secured. They want to move towards being more green, but they also need it to be affordable for everyone. And it's always sort of balancing those three off each other, when realistically, you can look to do all three at the same time. They link together so perfectly. There's so much. Well, again, there's so many synergies between the three of them. I mean, in your opinion, what is going to make the biggest change for continuing to advance these technologies?
Well, I think it's making sure that you get industry and governments to speak the same language, start delivering on the targets. It's, you've never had as many targets as we have, but you also need to go out and do the proofing. So similar to when we started this discussion, we talked about you need to do a pilot, then you can scale it up, etc. So you need to have some success stories and then build on those and keep bringing it across. And then I think during the energy crisis we recently had, and where prices came up, you also got the consumers to take their share of it. So suddenly you got people to change behavior, but there needs to be some in it for them as well, right? So if you have flexible prices, so shifting, consumption to hours where it's not as expensive, and let the consumers then benefit from a changed behavior, and remember that it's not done overnight. It is a long way, but then also remember to show how you're moving along.
Okay, definitely. And it's quite hard for, I think, consumers to change old habits. This is why we often consider EVs sort of the tipping point, because that's when they've got something very real. It's there in front of them. They're very aware that they've got essentially a huge battery that they can fill it with energy and take energy out of. Whereas I think smart meters was the first step, but it maybe didn't change the sort of long-term permanent habits. I mean, why is having a framework in place, and that we know why commitment from the industry is so important, but having that sort of framework in place for looking at the steps, what's the key area of importance for that?
Well, I think it's because industry, would know that they can make this viable business, right? But they need the long-term commitment, and having the framework and not something that changes all the time. Then you can start calculating, how do I make this a good business as well? Because the energy transition and several of these new technologies will be able to stand alone and create great business cases, and then you do get the capital who wants to invest. At the moment, if the biggest uncertainty is whether you get permit to build your plant, then you can't attract investors. Then you can't make all the deals with your joint venture partners, etc. Right? So that's on that side. And then on the consumer side, if you change, well, now EV is, kind of known and accepted across. But in the beginning, people were, oh, can I actually charge it? What if I have to go long term, etc. Right? So sometimes it's, where do you get the tipping points? And when it comes to smart meters, at least in Denmark where I live, we saw a significant drop both in energy consumption. I think it was like 15% less energy. And on top of that, consumers actually shifted the consumption from peak hours. So approximately 10 to 20% was moved from peak hours to the other hours, because you have smart devices, so you can put on your dishwasher during hours, and you have apps where you know what is the price at any given time, and that hasn't come back. So the consumption is less than it was before the crisis.
Amazing. Okay, excellent. Yeah, the tipping point, especially for EVs, I think is quite a UK focused view. But it's good to hear, obviously, other countries in Europe came to that a lot quicker. I mean, what you said there about planning permission being a huge thing that can hold back just these technologies going forward, or like generally the sort of transition across the space. Would you say that that's one of because there's so many problems or sort of milestones that they've got to pass to get forward? Would you say that's one of the biggest ones that we're facing, the planning permission, or there's a number of things, grid constraints. What do you think is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we need to overcome?
I think planning permission is definitely a big issue, but I think that is actually easier to handle if you're there. Where the grid constraint is not only restricted to Europe, it's the same challenge the entire world is facing. We have an old, outdated grid which was built under different conditions. So of course you can bring up your grid. It takes time. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of skills that aren't necessarily there. But at the same time, that's why the energy storage and transportation is crucial as well. Because if you can suddenly move energy from where it's produced to where it's needed,
Yes.
then you solve a lot. So that bottleneck is needed to be solved, and you can say there's been so much talk about interconnectors in Europe, and they're coming along, but it did take a lot of talking before it started being reality.
Absolutely.
And then again on permitting, it's also about having that visibility on your pipeline. Because if, for instance, the different sub-suppliers who need to deliver some of the subcomponents, if they don't know what the pipeline is, or if there's too much stop and go, then
Yep.
they can't attract investors or capital into building new factories and so forth. So some of it is actually very much driven by financial constraints.
Yeah. It sounds like for any of these stages that we go through, if again all of the different sort of stakeholders aren't coming together, it could break down at any of those stages. They need to get the pilot plan first to demonstrate that it works, and then you need planning permission to actually go ahead and do it, and then you need partnerships between government and businesses, and then wider partnerships between different businesses that have synergies to make it profitable. Those are the steps that all need to be hit to really see this through.
Yes, and then of course then you need all the clever hands and heads to make it reality. And AI can help a lot, but it can't do everything. But then you can say it can help, but then that's actually also where it might even help on the economy of scale, because the need for electricity that the big tech suppliers or data centers are needing requires even more build out of green electricity, right? So
Right.
it's kind of two of the same parts. And then I was just remembering the other day I was talking to a company who are like looking at growing algae using bio CO2 from so if they could actually start making new products and at the same time removing CO2 without having to do carbon capture.
Yeah.
It's kind of taking two of the best sides, but of course then they also need to scale their technology and do it in those ways. So I think there's a lot of things we haven't seen yet, and typically that's the exciting part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how do you what would you say is, again, coming back to it, for a business like that one, the first step of taking that from just the conversation through to all the way through to everyday use?
Well, I think what they've done is they've already, had their pilot plant and proof of concept for the technology. They have been out talking both to the uh, upstream part, who's actually going to be their feedstock, or you could say, where do they get the bio CO2 that they need? It could be from a biogas plant or something, right? And then at the end, how can their product then be used in other products, whether it being fish food or something else? And then would there be people who would be willing to buy that because it fits into their own decarbonization story? So I think as a company, they will be successful if they manage to deal with all the different risk elements. And in the beginning, there's a lot of risks, and then it's about finding the right partners, etc. So I think they will be, but they need to now go out and build the first couple of demonstration plants, and then see how it goes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, look, I mean, that's all obviously the main things that I really wanted to discuss with you. Again, your position, having been with leading positions with companies like Siemens, Ørsted, Dong, with consultancies, with suppliers, with developers, you've got an excellent macro view, I'd say, of the energy space across Europe. Just before we go, are there any sort of final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Well, I think it's time for people actually to follow through on it. I'm as a person optimistic, even though there are challenges out there. There's also a lot of commitment from the industry who wants to solve this. So there might be a few barriers, but jointly we can make this successful if we all, because it is the long run, and we have to do it, and we are already kind of behind the timeline.
Exactly. We need to get a move on. But and the good news is, it sounds like it is very doable. It's all there.
It's all there. It's just people need to be committed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll leave it there, but I look forward to seeing you again on the next one. Take care.